The Armenian Genocide was the systematic destruction of the Armenian people and identity in the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Spearheaded by the ruling Committee of Union and Progress, it was implemented primarily through the mass murder of around 1 million Armenians during the death marches to the Syrian desert and the forced Islamization of others, primarily women and children. However, Turkey, the modern-day remnants of the Ottoman Empire, still denies the occurrence of the Armenian Genocide and refuses to acknowledge the atrocity. Today, our speaker, Taner Akçam, will examine the root of this denial and its impact on reconciliation efforts in the region. Dr. Akçam is the inaugural director of the Armenian Genocide Research Program at the Promise Institute at UCLA. Previously, he was the Kalustyan and Mugar Chair in Modern Armenian History and Genocide and the Strasser Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University. Dr. Akçam grew up in Turkey, where he was imprisoned for editing a political youth journal and was subsequently adopted as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International in 1976. Dr. Akçam later received political asylum in Germany and in 1996 received his doctorate from the University of Hanover. Dr. Akçam is widely recognized as one of the first Turkish scholars to write extensively on the Ottoman Turkish genocide of the Armenians in the early 20th century. He is the author of more than 10 scholarly works as well as numerous articles in Turkish, German, and English on the Armenian genocide and Turkish nationalism. Today, Dr. Akçam will examine the national security implications of the Turkish denial of the Armenian genocide and how that affects stability and reconciliation efforts in the region today. Dr. Akçam's presentation commemorates the 20th anniversary of the Mgrublian Center for Human Rights and is the center's annual lecture dedicated to Armenian genocide. And in honor of this lecture today, if you look at the center of your table, you will see a lot of books stacked there. Please feel free to take one, given to you on behalf of the center. Take one, take them home, read them, engage with them, do as CMCers always do. And also in the back, there's also memorabilia and other little tokens that you can pick up as well to celebrate the 20th anniversary. Before we get started, a few quick reminders. Please take this time to silence and put away your cell phones. We have an amazing presentation for you today. Be present, get ready to engage in dialogue, and ask thoughtful questions. As usual, video and audio recording by the audience is strictly prohibited. Welcome to the Athenaeum.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. This is really an amazing experience for me. I'm really honored to be here. I'm humbled. And, well, this is a sad occasion. This is April 24 is coming, and it's another commemoration of Armenian genocide. And I'm going to talk on the denial of Armenian genocide, and I try to shed a light on a special aspect of denial, namely the national security concept and how it related with today's development in the Middle East also. And so I hope I will convince you with my argument. So in 2007, two Turkish Armenian journalists, Arat Dink, son of assassinated journalist Hrant Dink, you may have heard, an Armenian journalist was assassinated on the open street in 2007, and Arat Dink is his son. And another journalist, Sarkis Seropyan, received suspended sentences of a year imprisonment for using the term genocide in 2007. There are several other court cases in Turkey today too. In its judgment, the Turkish court stated, here is the quote you can read, "Talk about genocide, both in Turkey and in other countries, unfavorably affects national security and the national interest. The claim of genocide has become part of and the means of special plans aiming to change the political boundaries of Turkey and a campaign to demolish its physical and legal structure." The ruling stated further that the Republic of Turkey is under a hostile diplomatic siege consisted of genocide resolutions. The acceptance of this claim, said court, may lead in future centuries to a questioning of the sovereignty right of Republic of Turkey over the land on which it is claimed this event occurred. Due to these national security concerns, the court declared that the claim of genocide in 1915 is not protected speech. And to quote the court again, the use of this freedom can be limited in accordance with aims such as protection of national security, of public order, of public security. The situation is not different here in the United States, actually. Even though by joint declaration of Congress on September 9, 1975, April 24, was declared a national day of remembrance for the Armenian genocide, and the President of the United States is authorized to and requested to issue a proclamation until 2021. None of the United States presidents, except Ronald Reagan in 1981, has used the term genocide. The main reason for this attitude was the same: national security concern of the United States in the Middle East. Over the years, with the same argument, American Congress declined to accept any resolution for recognition of Armenian genocide. And so, both United States presidents and the Congresses and the opponents of the resolution have very similar argument to the Turkish court's decision above. Indeed, it would appear that, as the court stated, using the term genocide unfavorably affects national security and the national interest of Turkey and of United States. After the recognition of Armenian genocide by United States President, you will hear the same arguments here in United States related to Armenian genocide restitution question. Because recognition is there, now the people will start to discuss on the reparation, restitution. And you will hear the same arguments again and again. And as you see, just recently, last week, Turkey and United States signed a huge military agreement, F-16 bombing airplanes, and it is around billions of dollars. And the State Department's official explanation is Turkey is a valuable partner of NATO, and it is national interest of United States. So you have here two opposing positions: realists on the one side, moral fundamentalists are on the other side. Two set of arguments: national security versus, or in other words, realists versus moral fundamentalists. The realists emphasize national security concerns of their country. In Turkey today, any attempt to openly discuss historic wrongs is denounced as a coward move in a master plan to partition the country, and it's therefore against the national security of Turkey. And here in the United States, the realists consider for years the acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide as against the United States national interest. So on the other side, we have the moral fundamentalists. They emphasize the supremacy of morality against real interests. So, what I want to make this evening, my point is that pitting national interest against morality as mutually exclusive is just plain wrong. This is my argument. In fact, what I really believe is that any security policy in the Middle East today that excludes morality cannot ultimately be a realistic policy that will work, and eventually it undermines the national security. This is my central argument. Indeed, if one knows Turkey and the Middle East, I know a little bit, one will easily recognize that the history and historical injustices are not just that issues from the past is the present in the Middle East. So, therefore, morality is a very real issue, And for realpolitik to be successful in the region, moral values in this instance, the specific one of the acknowledging historic wrongdoing, must be integrated into a policy of national security. How? It's the big question. There is a strong interconnection between security, democracy, and facing history. This is my argument in the Middle East. Even a passing glance at the region, for example, the developments in Syria, or the recent development between Azerbaijan and Armenia, shows us very clear that historical injustices and the persistent denial of these injustices by one or another state or ethnic religious group is a major stumbling block, not only for the democratization of the region, but also for the establishment of stable relations between different ethnic and religious groups. My central argument is that a failure to confront history honestly is one of the major reasons for insecurity and instability in the region. The question that I have struggled to find over the years, to find an answer is, why? Why is the discussion of historical injustices something that goes to the heart of freedom of speech? Everyone can talk on any topic in the history. Why this is perceived as a threat to Turkish national security? So I propose you all that we take the argument about national security of Turkey very seriously. Yes, Turkey has a national security problem if you use the term genocide. Take it seriously, this argument. And examine the roots of this mentality and to show the reason why it must be changed today. The mindset that an open discussion of history engenders a security problem originates actually from the break of the Ottoman Empire into nation states starting in the 19th century. From late Ottoman Empire time to the present, there has been a continuous tension between the state's concern for secure borders and the society's need to come to terms with abuses of human rights. In the history, security and territorial integrity of a crumbling empire and human rights abuses can be linking to the two faces of a coin. The two separate faces of the same coin cause the rise of two opposing historical narratives. I have so many Turkish students here, I met them, and I'm sure this is what they learn in their school every year. The dominant narrative in Turkey today, one history, the narrative is the following. The story of the partition of the Ottoman Empire among the great powers, which ended with the empire's total collapse and disintegration. And if you were to review the books in Turkey, which recount this narrative again and again, you would hard-pressed to find any reference to any massacre or any genocide during the late 19th century or early 20th century. Instead, Christian communities were portrayed in this historiography as the seditious agents of the imperialist great power continually conspiring against Turkish state. This is the major narrative. The other narrative has been developed basically by those ethnic and religious minorities, Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, and Kurds, some of the Kurds, not all of them. And they also developed a story about the human rights abuses in the past, not much about the partition. The history of the 19th century is mostly formulated in terms of human rights and the intervention of great powers on behalf of the minority groups. It is plain to see the contrast in both positions, in both historiography. In one perspective, the great powers are portrayed, in Turkish perspective, great powers were portrayed as evil and must be criticized for having intervened too much. They caused the problems because they intervened in the Ottoman Empire. In the other perspective, the great powers have been characterized somehow positive and are criticized for having not intervened enough. You have two narratives here. Turkish controversies about facing national history, in particular the Armenian genocide, can be understood in part as the deployment of two apparently contradictory historical narratives against one another. Whenever the proponents of the acknowledgement bring up the history of human rights abuses, they are confronted with an opposite narratives. I experienced with my old Turkish students. Whenever they were faced with the Armenian genocide, they came with the opposing argument, but the imperialist power wanted to partition our country. So they used these two different narratives as weapons against each other in their conversation. So, let's look the history. 1919, 1923. Indeed, there have been a certain period of time, there are several, but I picked one period of time in the history, where national security and human rights became inseparably intertwined. I would like to look closer into such a moment, the period after the First World War, between 1918 and 1923. You don't need to know much about the history. Don't worry about it. I will give you the basic so that you can follow me. When the First World War ended, with the Ottoman defeat, Ottoman government lost the war, along with Germany. For the terms of a peace settlement, the political decision makers of the time grappled with two distinct yet related questions. The first question was related to the territorial integrity of the Ottoman state, and it was the following. Should the Ottoman state retain its independence within the boundaries of 1918? Should new states be permitted to arise on the territory of the Ottoman state? If so, how should be the borders of the new states determined? This was one central question. The second question was related to the wartime atrocities committed by the ruling Union and Progress Party, the governing party in Ottoman Empire, and against Armenian citizens and other citizens. And the question was, what can be done about the wartime crimes against the Armenians and the other minorities? How should the perpetrator be punished? Central question for any mass atrocities you face with this question. These two questions, which are not related with each other too much, territorial integrity versus punishment of the perpetrator, these couldn't be tackled separately and were intertwined with each other. I will tell you how. The Mondros ceasefire treaty is 1918, and it will show you, this is an exaggerated map, but because Turkish nationalists made this, but it is almost the boundaries of Ottoman Empire when the First World War ended, that you see here. This is the Mondros ceasefire agreement. And on the other side, you see, even though there was an agreement, the great powers' military operations continued. So this is, but mainly you should keep this map in mind to understand the development. So the question related to the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire led to the formation of two different viewpoints. Turkish nationalist movement, under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, favored continued sovereignty within reduced border as defined 1918 boundaries. And it was the position of the Ottoman government also. And the allied power, an ethnic religious group as the Greeks, Armenians, and the Kurds also, they, to less degree Kurds, on the other hand, argued for the establishment of new states on both occupied territories of the Ottoman Empire. occupied and unoccupied territories. The successive treaties that you may have heard about them, 1927 and 1923 Lausanne reflects these divergence point of views. Here are the maps for you. For 1927 agreement, the yellow part that you see, the great power allocated this territory to Turks. This is the Turkish territory. And all other territories, I will show you in another map, maybe it's better for you. This is the, you see the Diyarbakir, this is the autonomous Kurdish area, and the Armenia, the map was drawn by Wilson, 1920 November. Armenia knows this as Wilsonian Armenia, and this area was the French zone, Italian occupation, and the western part was the Greek part of, and in the yellow part, this was the official Turkish state that the great power allocated for the Turks. So we have, and the other is today's modern Turkey, and very close, almost the same 1918 Mondros ceasefire agreement. So, as a result of this fight over territory in the early period of the Republic, a general understanding of history in modern Turkey emerged, which can be formulated in the following way. My Turkish students, they all learn this in their schools. We, Turks, who see ourselves as the legitimate successors of the Ottoman Empire, defended our sole territory, remaining part, against the Armenians, Greeks, and the lesser extent Kurds who were trying to carve up the Anatolia with the help of the great power. This is how we successfully established our nation state, in a fight against the Armenians, Greeks, partially against the Kurds. Territorial integrity. And for that reason, Turks considers 1920 as a black stain in Turkish history. And Ottoman members of the Ottoman government who signed 1920 Sevr Agreement were sentenced to death by the Turkish Nationalist Parliament in Ankara, because this was a black stain. And on the other side, the heroic fight was the Lausanne for the Turks that we established. So the interesting part is the Sevr for the Armenians and Kurds and the Greeks, even though it was not exactly what they expected, but they solved the question in favor of them, and it brought a little bit justice to their suffering in the history. And the Lausanne, according to Greeks, Armenians, and the Kurds, it's a black stain in the history. So, as a result of this fight over territory in the early period of the Republic, a general understanding emerged, and we considered that this, as if this entire history only is a history of partition and history of emerging new nation states with several boundaries, different boundaries. What happened with the question of justice? How to punish the Turks? In Turkish historiography, we totally forgot this part of the history. The Sevr and Lausanne, even though it has been debated among the historians also, in Greece, among the Kurdish historians and the Armenians, mostly as a territorial dispute, but there was another aspect of these both arguments. The central question during the Sevr and Lausanne period also, the other central question, how would those perpetrators of human rights abuses during the war be punished? If we look at the attitude of the contemporary actors of that time, we should observe that everyone, to your surprise, everyone, including the Turkish nationalists, agreed that these crimes should not be left unpunished. There was uncertainty, however, about the scope of the penalty. One group advocated for the trial and punishment of only some first-hand criminals, as well as some of the top unionist leaders. This is the party that organized the Armenian genocide. Another group advocated for the trials of individual suspects, casting the net as wide as possible, and for the punitive dismemberment of the Ottoman state into new states created on its territory. Allied power debated these, of course. How should we punish the Turks because of this crime? They never argued that they had certain colonial interests, certain imperialist interests. They covered up, of course, their policy of dividing remaining territories with the human rights argument. Rightly so. And here a quote from you. I mean, Assistant High Commissioner of Istanbul, the British official, Webb, sent a telegram to Paris conference on April 3, 1919. He said, in order to punish all of those persons who are guilty of the Armenian horrors, it is necessary to punish the Turks as a group. Therefore, I propose that the punishment be given on a national level through the partitioning up to the last Turkish Empire, and on a personal level by trying those high officials who are on the list in my possession, and in a manner that would serve as an example for their successors. So we have to punish Turks because of the crimes on the one side, because partitioning the country, on the other side, individual punishment, the trials. Indeed, there were also trials in Turkey. Just a short history lesson. In 1919, Turkish nationalist movement started to emerge, and they settled in Ankara. Today is the capital city of Turkey. During 1919-1920, we had two political centers. One is the Ottoman government in Istanbul, and the other Turkish nationalists in Ankara. 1919, both governments, Turkish nationalists and the Ottoman government, met in a city which is called Amasya, and they signed protocols. Because according to Ottoman constitution, there had to be an election in 1919. And how they should conduct the elections, they came together and they signed 5 protocols. Secret only between two political entities, Istanbul government and the nationalist movement in Ankara. Here is a passage from the first protocol. İttihadizm, this is for the Party of Union and Progress that committed the Armenian genocide, which organized the genocide. İttihadizm, or any hint of its reawakening, is politically very damaging. It is judicially and politically necessary to punish those who committed crimes in connection with the Armenian deportation. So, Istanbul government and Turkish nationalists were both in favor of punishment of the perpetrator, and they also described the atrocities as evil deeds of the Union and Progress Party, and they also called these perpetrators who have been sullied by the nefarious act of deportation and massacre. In September 1919, just before these protocols signed, Mustafa Kemal sent a letter to Istanbul government and made the following statement. The punishment of the perpetrators of Armenian genocide should not stay only on the paper, but should be carried out, since this would successfully impress the foreign elements. So they want the punishment of the perpetrator for one purpose, to impress the great powers. And Mustafa Kemal called 1920 the atrocities as a shameful act. This is the title of my book, 2006. They expected a favorable solution in Paris Peace Conference. They thought if they punished the perpetrator, they could get a deal territorial separation in Paris, but this strategy failed. There were trials in Istanbul, more than 60 trials, 200 defendants, 3 were hanged, and there were a lot of other penalties, mostly in absentia, but 200 people were sentenced in different level of punishments. As soon as they understood that the strategy of punishment is not working, the trials in Istanbul stopped. And this is again a letter from Mustafa Kemal, August 20, 1920. He was the person, as you read, calling that the punishment of perpetrator should not stay on the paper. But when the Sevres Agreement was signed, on 10th August 1920, he threatened Istanbul government with the following line, saying that the Ottoman government continues to hang the children of the homeland. So the perpetrator became children of the homeland, on accusations of having perpetrated deportation and massacres, which now became totally senseless. So what Kemal meant, he was not a human rights activist, of course. He was a political man and nationalist. He meant whereby the Ottoman government punished Turks for what they had done to the Christian minorities would make sense only if Turkey received some positive results in terms of a better treaty to secure the Ottoman territories. However, Sevres has been signed, Ottoman sovereignty was not acknowledged, and the Ottoman territories were distributed among different nations. Therefore, Kemal concluded these senseless death sentences should be halted, and it indeed stopped. Let's go to Germany. It is better to compare the development in Turkey between 1919 and 1922 to compare with Germany Morgenthau plan after Second World War. I don't know how many of you have heard about the Morgenthau plan. When the war was over, Morgenthau, son of the Henry Morgenthau, who was the ambassador in Istanbul, he was given the task to develop a plan for Germany. And it is also formally known as the Treasury Plan for the treatment of Germany, was devised by Assistant Treasury Secretary Harry Dexter White and Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr. in summer of 1944. Plan foresaw the partition of Germany into 6 different small states. Demilitarization of Germany, new boundaries for Germany, partition of Germany, new, and so on and so forth. This is the map you see there, that Morgenthau plan. When the war was not ended and Goebbels learned about this plan, and Nazi propaganda minister made enough capital from this plan to inflict tens of thousands of extra casualties on British and American troops in the battles that followed its publication. And it was in autumn 1944. The president election campaign's results opened, it became an issue in Germany also. But Morgenthau plan was never implemented. Why? Because of, there are several reasons, because of one of the letters sent by Secretary of Stimson to the President Washington, September 5th, 1944. The Secretary of State basically said, we should stop talking about partition of Germany. Instead, we should concentrate on Nuremberg by the apprehension, investigation, and trial of all the Nazi leaders and instrument of the Nazi system of terrorism, such as the Gestapo, with punishment delivered as promptly, swiftly, and severely as possible. So instead of dealing with the partition question, we should concentrate on the question of punishment, because he feared if Morgenthau plan had been implemented, we would have been celebrated Nazis as national liberators of Germany. And this is what happened in Turkey. This is the major analogy with Germany, actually. So this is now my concluding remark after Morgenthau analysis. So reviewing Turkish history from this perspective reveals actually three important new perspectives for us. First, Mustafa Kemal's condemnation of the Armenian massacres is actually diametrically opposed to current official of Turkish policy of denial. Actually, if Turks were smart, they should take their nationalist leaders' utterances, what he said in 1920s, as the beginning of their argumentation related to Armenian genocide. It would open at least the way for conversation. Secondly, it shows very clearly to us that the concept of Turkish national security must be revised and changed. Or let me, maybe one more additional information. In Istanbul, when the trial was happening, they established a military tribunal in Istanbul, and they tried the perpetrator of the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide. And the same court, May 1920, sentenced Mustafa Kemal and another 100 nationalists for opposing the Sevres Agreement. So the same military tribunal symbolized two major questions. Number one, punishing the perpetrators for the crime that they committed. Number two, punishing those who opposed the territorial integrity, who defended the territorial integrity of Ottoman Empire. So whenever you open the topic in Turkey about a crime that committed in the past, this is the reason that the denialists immediately raised the issue of national security. There is an intertwining there. So because of this, that the court-martial number one symbolizes these two different separate questions in one court's body, we still today, or the ruling elites, considered the genocide, talking about a genocide, as a national security concern. This is the historical background. So my argument is this security concept must be revised and changed. The main flaw of this concept is its perception that the promotion of basic democratic rights, such as equality under the law, social reforms, and the freedom of speech are considered as a threat to national security. In the past, the emergence of so-called Armenian question was the result of Armenian demands for equality and social reform, nothing else. And which arguably would have led really to a better Ottoman society, actually. Their demands and Armenians themselves were considered as a security threat, which led to them being targeted for massacres and deportation. This is exactly what's happening with Kurds in Turkey. Kurdish demands for equality and social reform is considered as a security threat, as a national security threat against Turkey. And this is the irony, my argument, is that the criminalizing historic inquiries for national security reasons is not only a huge obstacle on the path to democracy, but also it is counterproductive and leads directly to real security problems of the country. Turkey faces real security problem in Turkey because of the Kurdish insurgents, but they created these by ignoring the Kurdish rights for equality and for social reform. So instead of solving Kurdish problem by seeking solution that would lead to a more democratic society, the old, and I would argue now useless security concept has been resurrected and has declared that the Kurdish demands are essentially a security problem for the nation. So as long as Turkey continues to regard moral principles, one of which the facing historic injustices with honesty, and national security as two opposing poles that are mutually exclusive and refuse to come to terms with the past for national security reasons indeed, as long as Turkey's national security is defined in opposition to an honest historic reckoning, further problems will be created. There is the third conclusion. The security aspect of the problem concerned the Middle East also. The strong interconnection between security and democracy and facing history can be seen by a passing glance in the Middle East. Today, historical injustices in the past and the persistent denial of these injustices by one or another state is one of the major stumbling blocks, not only for the democratization of the region, but also for the establishment of stable relations between different ethnic and religious groups and the state. Putting in another way, the different ethnic religious groups, Kurds, Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, Arabs, different ethnic religious groups are still seeing each other through the lens of the past. They still see in each other the historic actors of the past. I lived in Syria around 3-4 years. I experienced myself also. For the Kurds and Arabs, Turks that did these things in the history, they still look through the prisma. The entire Middle East you can consider as a traumatized society, actually, societies. So then they still see in each other the historic actors of the past. The entire region is a kind of traumatized because of these historic injustices and by not addressing it by those who committed these. So if you don't acknowledge a wrongdoing in the past, there is a high potentiality that you are going to repeat it. This is the fear of the neighbors of Turkey. They fear that the Turkey denies all these historic events and they have the potential to do the same exactly. So, because of this reason, the persistent denial of this crime in the past, a part of your security policy, brings insecurity towards the other powers. Because denial of the past crime means the potentiality of repeating it. For this reason, any security concept, any policies of realpolitik in and for the region that ignores and forgets the addressing of historic wrongdoing is doomed to fail at the end. My central argument is that a failure to confront history honestly is one of the major reasons for insecurity and instability in the region. You cannot solve any problem in the Middle East today without addressing historic wrongdoings, because history is not something in the past. Past is the present in the Middle East. Thank you for listening.
So much for the wonderful presentation. It was incredibly interesting. We will now be transitioning to the Q&A portion of the evening. So please come up, stand behind either mics. We're going to be alternating between the two. And when you ask your question, make sure to introduce yourself, say your name, as well as your year and your major. And also make sure to keep your question short, 1 or 2 sentences, please. And only 1 question per person. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you so much for the speech. I'm Bilge, and I'm one of those Turkish youth who was subjected to all this Turkish education. And like, to speak frankly, I wasn't aware about what happened during the Armenian Genocide until I went to an American high school, because I wasn't given a proper education about it. And I think one of the reasons that the Turkish and the Middle Eastern communities are not addressing the issues right now is because, simply put, people are not educated, and we have a government that is definitely not interested in claiming the wrongdoings done in the past. And I see it like you're gonna have a nation that is willing to admit what they did if they're properly educated. And when the government is not building that into the education system, looking forward, what is an alternative that we can do to make sure that the Turkish communities, not only them, but also the Middle Eastern communities, are aware of what actually happened in the past and are willing to move forward with admitting whatever happened?
Is there any question there? I missed the question.
Yeah, the question is, how do we solve this? Like, what is the solution? How do we change the education system when the government is like a dictator and they're not putting it into the education system?
Well, you should invite me again. The food was excellent. I mean, the atmosphere is great. I can give another talk on that talk. It is a long, long issue, but let me answer very short. We need democracy in this country. Without democratization, you cannot openly talk on the injustices in a society. Democracy cannot solve the problem related to justice, actually. We experience this here in the United States. Look what happened with Native Americans and what's going on with racism. But democracy is the entrance ticket. You can enter to address these kind of injustices. So what we need in Turkey, a democratic structure, freedom of speech, that made possible to make the argument in public sphere. This is the most important thing. And this is what we are missing in Turkey. And this is the central answer. Only through democratization. There is no other way around.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Riley Green. I'm a junior at CMC studying IR and history. And as you were talking about this retelling of history that you see in Turkey, I was thinking about what's happening in Ukraine today and the history that people in Russia are being taught, and the incredible amount of propaganda that we see in our media, but really what the Russian state media is, showing their citizens every day. And I'm curious as to if you think this is one of the main reasons why we see the atrocity committed today in Ukraine, and if this is the case that, the propaganda that we're seeing is fueling this violence. How do you see this ever coming to an end if the history that these individuals are being taught is just to its core wrong, that Ukrainians are Nazis, the language of dehumanization and all of that?
Thank you thank you very much for the question. I'm not an expert of international relations. I cannot fully answer your question, but nation states mainly follow their national interest. This is their realpolitik. As long as we have the nation states existed as the main political actors in the world, there will be further mass atrocities in this world, unfortunately. We may reduce it, but not fully stop it. It is not so that there are bad guys out there and the United States and the Western Hemisphere, they are the good guys, This is what we mostly teach in our schools. I don't agree with it, as if there is something that we can prevent what is going wrong out there. I think this is a complex nation-state system, and today we have a world system. Each nation-state operates without listening to the other, independently, and putting their national interest as the first. Look, the American exceptionalism, United States national interest. You can hardly question it until 2000, I forgot the exact year, they didn't sign the International Criminal Court, acknowledge the International Criminal Court. So including United States and Russia, I think the nation-state system is the major problem, and we cannot solve in a near future, but we should work harder. There is no other way around.
Thank you.
Hello, I really enjoyed your talk. My name's Aiden. I'm a history major at Pitzer. And I have a two-part question for you. The first part is that Turkey has an upcoming election. Do you think with this possible change in leadership, there could be more recognition of the Armenian genocide? And second, with immigrant communities, with Turkish immigrant communities living in both Germany and the US, are these communities more likely to recognize the genocide?
This is another great question. Thank you. The election in Turkey, May 14th, we are very excited and working very, I'm not working very hard, but I know a lot of my friends working very hard. To your surprise, related to historic injustices, actually the governing party was or has been more progressive than the opposition party. This is to your surprise. AKP, the Islamist government, when they came to power, they challenged the traditional denialist policy in Turkey, and there was a period of opening until 2011-12. We can dispute about the exact date, because they have an Islamic origin, and it was easy for them to put a distance between themselves and those nationalists who organized the Armenian genocide. But after a while, the Islamist government accepted the default code of the state and now continue the denialist policy. The opposition party, when there was an opening towards Armenian-related issues, today each of the opposition party were opposing these openings. So I don't expect any positive change regarding the recognition. But this election, if the opposition wins, will bring an opening in Turkey. Osman Kavala won't be in prison, and other journalists and opposition members who are in prison now, they will be out of the prison. There will be a more democratic society, and it would be easier for us to articulate about the Armenian genocide. And it is true in diaspora, you can openly talk and discuss, and the Turkish groups in the United States, in Germany, they are more open to Armenian genocide issue than the people in Turkey. It's also definitely the case. But for Turks, there is a major problem. I have to really emphasize this. You have to know I have to protect the Turks a little bit. Every nation has the skeleton in their basement. This is a general rule. The problem is some societies are able to put a distance between themselves and the founding fathers. You can talk about the past atrocities even though you really extol your founding fathers. Here in the United States, it's possible to talk about the founding fathers as slave owners, or who gave the orders to exterminate certain Native American tribes. And at the other side, you can really extol the 1776 Declaration of Independence and so on. Both works. Why? Because today you put a distance between yourself and your founding fathers that developed another identity in this country, made it a way possible to put this distance and to talk about others. This is the democratization of a society that brings. This is what we are missing in Turkey. Still in Turkey, the opposition and the government consider Mustafa Kemal as a prophet. You cannot criticize Mustafa Kemal like Washington here or Thomas Jefferson. You will put in prison in Turkey if you criticize Mustafa Kemal. This is the law. So the problem in Turkey is to put a distance between us, the new generations, and the founding fathers of this society. This is the missing lead, and this can be only made possible by democratization of the society. You have to develop a new identity. This is the basic difficulties that we are facing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. My name is Anya. I'm a CMC senior majoring in international relations and economics. And I was just wondering how, when the United Nations finally formally declared and codified the Armenian massacre as a genocide, did this shift any domestic or internal rhetoric within Turkey about how the genocide is discussed, and did it change the level of international attention it received?
Yes and no. Every decision in different parliaments in the Western Hemisphere had an impact on Turkey. Sometimes it backfired. It increased the nationalistic feeling among the people. But at the end, the United States' recognition of genocide made something aware that it is over. Turks and Turkish government knows that they don't have anything to fight. They will continue to deny, but they don't need to give billions of dollars in Washington to another lobbying campaigns to stop any development. So today, I have to add one more thing. Not only the international atmosphere is in favor of recognition of Armenian genocide, but to your surprise, I would argue that those who are in favor of recognizing historic injustices, we won the psychological war in Turkey today. If there is an opening, I guarantee you, we will have the psychological overhead. I know that from my own body. In 1990s, early 2000, I was attacked. I was dragged from courtroom to courtroom. I got death threats, and Hrant Dink was assassinated. We were persecuted by Turkish ruling elite. If April 24 is coming now, listen how they are going to deny the Armenian genocide from a very defensive position. So this has changed the American recognition, and we couldn't discuss, of course, what is next after recognition of Armenian genocide, because everyone was asking that the United States government should recognize the genocide, and they did. So what's next? And this is the time, according to me, to create an Armenian genocide restitution movement. And I believe American legal system is different than the European legal system, and it gives some leverages to make pressure on Turkey. I'm a realpolitik guy, actually. One of the important reasons why Turkey continues to deny Armenian genocide is that those who are in favor of recognition do not have enough leverage in their hand. And if those has this leverage, like United States, they don't use these leverages. So American legal system actually potentially gives us a leverage to use this to pressure Turkey. How? I don't know whether you have heard the Swiss gold case, Holocaust, billions of dollars Switzerland had to pay for the Holocaust victims only because of the American pressure and the American legal system. So this is a new era, and it needs a new conversation on that topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bryce. I'm a senior at Pomona, majoring in international relations. Thank you so much for giving the talk today. I was going to ask a question very similar to that last one, so I guess I'll kind of follow up on something that you talked about instead. You mentioned that there's a risk of backfiring when there's more push for like recognition for the genocide in Turkey. And so I'm wondering, like, what causes that backfiring to happen, and how can that be avoided and instead push for like an earnest recognition that doesn't trigger a larger backlash?
I mean, again, the opening, the democratization, if I understand your question correctly, we need really public conversation in Turkey, public debate and discussions. As soon as they allow me to appear in Turkish television, I'm not kidding. This is the way how it should. You know, every April 24, or not only April 24, now you are not aware of course, May 4th is the anniversary of another mass atrocity in Turkey, Dersim area, 1937-38. Turkish army exterminated around 30,000 of Kurds, and this is the anniversary of that event. And there are now, because of modern technology, YouTube channels. There are so many demands. I mean, I had to talk in 10 different YouTube channels about this massacre. And it's same with the April 24. The basic problem in Turkey, government knows this. This is the reason they put a lid on the path. They don't want the society should talk openly about it. This is our major problem. And especially, I have to add, especially after the assassination of Hrant Dink, 2007, it opened the eye of a lot of young Turks after Hrant's assassination. So my hope is that the election will end with the defeat of the government and a democratic structure will establish and the public conversation will be possible on Armenian genocide.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. My name is Mi. I'm a sophomore at CMC. My question is also kind of a follow-up from a couple questions ago. While you were discussing the question of problems and justice, it was making me reflect on how justice can be achieved. Clearly, first step is acknowledging that the genocide happened in the first place. But after that, with a crime as big as genocide, how can true justice be achieved when the aftermath of said crime leads to generations of trauma? Like, how can you right that wrong? I know clearly the challenge is acknowledging it in the first place, and we're not quite there yet, but having like a future forward optimistic view that that'll happen, what do you think next steps would be to kind of make it right?
There are two important set of developments. One is the domestic development in Turkey. There should be a domestic opposition to pressure Turkish government for the recognition of Armenian genocide. If you are the students of international relations or the history or dealing with the historic injustices, as you know, the facing history has different options. It starts with the Truth and Reconciliation Committees all the way to retributive justice or the restorative justice or several different other opportunities there. What could be the best option for Turkey? What would the real reconciliation in Turkey or for Turkey? My approach to that is the Luxembourg Agreement. I don't know whether you have heard about it. 1952, Konrad Adenauer single-handedly started a process. Everyone thinks that it is initiated by Americans or Great Britain. It's not true. It came directly from Adenauer itself, and there was negotiation between Germany and Israel, despite a big opposition in Israel against the negotiations with the perpetrator. At the end, there was an agreement, Luxembourg Agreement. Germany agreed to pay reparation to Israel, and there was a second agreement, which is really important for us. Jewish organizations, around 28 of them, came together and established an organization. It is called Claim Commission. Today, maybe some of your graduate students are sponsored by the Claim Commission. When I was working at Clark University, every year we got 2 or 3 students really got the scholarship from Claim Commission. So the Claim Commission was a coordinated organization of the Jewish that negotiated with Germany, and at the end, they also get certain reparation and restitution. So my idea is now that the really Armenian organizations should come together and establish their claim commission, because even in United States there are ways and means to develop a reparation movement. And regarding Turkey and Armenian relations, I can only repeat a general rule. You cannot find a reconciliation if both parties agrees to the solution. You have to, this is the process of talking, negotiation. You know, you have to create a feeling among Armenians that they should say, I'm satisfied with what Turks offered. And you have to create the same satisfaction, not everybody, but at least in the majority of society, saying that, yeah, we are happy what we did. So how you can achieve this is an important question. But I have another argument here. You know, talking about the ways and the means of reconciliation sometimes more important than the results, because it changed the attitude of people towards each other. The major problem, this is the major distinction between Holocaust and Armenian genocide, Turkey and Armenia are neighbors. They have common boundaries, and there is a huge Armenian community in Turkey. So it's a complicated issue, and I hope that we will work towards that direction, that one day Turkey will discuss about the question of reparation, restitution with Armenia, and the claim commission of the Armenian organization.
Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim, Professor Akçam. My name is Aliyah. I was sitting with you at the head table. And so I am from Russia, but I am from that specific region that you also know, Tatarstan, which has a lot of links historically to Turkey. And right now, talking to some of the Tatar nationalists and separatists right now, I can hear some support for Turkish side more than Armenian side in Tatarstan. But my actual question was not really about that. So even though I am Tatar, my passport is still Russian. And I could not go home this winter break. And I went to Turkey. And the reason for that, because actually coming there, I found myself in a situation that Russian became one of, like, I don't know, second largely spoken language, at least in the streets right now. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of Russians and a lot of Ukrainians right now in Turkey. And I guess from what I've noticed, Russians, it's mostly creative class and also computer scientists. And for Ukrainian side, it's mostly mothers with children. But yeah, my question is actually not about that as well. Yeah, me and my friend who were hosting me, we traveled around Turkey in Izmir, in Bodrum, in Fethiye, and other cities. And we saw an incredible number of Atatürks around us. And not just one portrait, but Atatürk younger age, like maturing age, different styles, etc. And we sensed that he is a prominent hero, not just for older generation, but also for younger generation. And my question is concerned the opposition that you were mentioning, and you were mentioning that there is opposition that's in favor of admitting Armenian genocide that is still in Turkey that just needs a little bit more support. My friend and I did not see that. Could you maybe expand more Like tell me more about them. Thank you.
You know, when the AKP government, the Islamist government that we are all complaining about now, came to power 2002, there was a huge opening in Turkey, and there was a reform movement, and Turkey wanted to be a member of European Union, and during that period, there was a really huge process of reforms and democratization in Turkey. Especially after Hrant Dink's assassination in 2007, beginning of 2008, 9, 10, there were Armenian genocide commemorations in Turkey more than in 20 cities. Unimaginable. And it stopped in 2016 because of other political developments. So in 2005, for example, first critical conference was organized in Turkey. Those scholars who had diverse opinion than the government, they were not all in favor of Armenian genocide, but critical scholars on history, honest individuals. 2005, we organized a conference on Armenia, on the facing history. This was the only topic 1 month long in Turkey. But in 2015-16, there were every year 15, 20 conferences on Armenian genocide in Turkey. This was business as usual. So what I'm trying to explain is there is a deep, really movement there. As soon as this suppression of the government moves away, goes away, this deep movement will come up and will talk openly. My feeling is, this is my own connection also from Turkey, the young generation, they are ready to talk about it. I mean, it is, again, I'm sorry that I'm repeating myself, because I believe in freedom of speech. I believe the public exchange. I believe the establishment of the public sphere. This is so crucial. This is what creates a new atmosphere in Turkey. And there are enough people in Turkey to fight about it. So there is authoritarian regime, we all think. You know, for April 24, I got 4 invitations from Turkey to talk in different YouTube channels who are in Istanbul, Ankara, in other cities. So there is already a deep movement there, and I'm hoping, really, that this will show up itself, because especially I have to make a clear distinction between Kurdish attitude towards Armenian genocide and the Turkish attitude in the western part. The Kurds are so open to Armenian genocide. And if you go to Kurdish areas, number one, you will see that almost in every Kurdish family there was an Armenian grandma or grandpa, not hardly grandpa, but mostly grandma, because they were taken out of the convoys for good or bad purposes. This is another topic. But they already acknowledges that what they did to Armenians is happening to them now. So because of that, they are more openly talking, discussing the Armenian genocide. I'm not very much optimist regarding the recognition of Armenian genocide by Turkish government, by the official state, because it's complicated history. But I'm very optimistic regarding the perception in Turkish society. And I believe this, maybe you can consider that I'm exaggerating too much, because I have been working in that field more than 30 years. I firmly believe we changed something in this society. And there is an acceptance that in Turkey today, if you talk anybody, they would say, yeah, I think something bad happened, but you know, we don't know exactly what happened. This is where we are now in the society.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akçam, for the amazing presentation today. Thank you so much, the Mgrublian Center, for making this presentation possible, as well as sponsoring the event. Thank you all for your amazing questions and participation here at the event tonight. And have a great weekend, and welcome to the last act of the semester.
Thank you.